Chapter 3, Section 1. The new school year began on September 11th. Sanshiro dutifully showed up at the university around 10:30 in the morning, only to find nothing but a lecture schedule posted at the entrance. Not a single student was in sight. He jotted down the courses he needed to attend in his notebook, then stopped by the administrative office, where at least the staff were in. He asked when lectures would begin, and was told they begin on September 11th. Just like that. Matter of fact as you please. But when Sanshiro pointed out that there didn't seem to be any lectures going on in any of the rooms, the clerk said that was because the professors weren't there yet. Sanshiro thought, well, that makes sense, and left the administrative office. He wandered around to the back of the building and looked up at the sky through the branches of a tall Zelkova tree. The sky seemed clearer and brighter than usual. He made his way down through the bamboo grass to the water's edge, came to that chinquapin tree he knew, and crouched down again. He kept glancing up at the hill, half hoping the woman might pass by again, but there was no sign of anyone. Sanshiro told himself that made perfect sense, but he stayed there crouching anyway. Then the noon cannon went off and startled him into heading back to his lodgings. The next day he went to school right at 8 in the morning. As Sanshiro passed through the main gate, the first thing that caught his eye was the row of ginkgo trees lining both sides of the main avenue. The row of ginkgo trees tapered off into the distance, and the road sloped gently downward from there. Standing at the edge of the main gate, Sanshiro looked out and saw only the upper floor of the science building on the other side of the slope was visible. Behind that roof, the Ueno forest glowed in the morning sun, shimmering in the distance. The light was coming straight at him. Sanshiro took in the sweeping depth of the view and felt a quiet sense of pleasure. To the right, where the row of ginkgo trees ends on this side, stands the Faculty of Law and Literature. A little further back on the left is the Natural History classroom. Both buildings were built in the same style, with tall, narrow windows topped by pointed triangular gables jutting out above them. Where the red brick met the black roof along the triangular edge, there ran a clean, straight line of stone. The color of that stone had a slight bluish tint, which gave a certain charm to the vivid red brick just below it. And these long windows and tall triangles repeated themselves side by side all the way down the row. Ever since Sanshiro had listened to Nonomiya's thoughts on the subject the other day, he had suddenly come to appreciate these buildings, but this morning, it struck him that this opinion wasn't Nonomiya's at all. It started to feel like the opinion had been his own all along, from the very beginning. He also thought it was interestingly irregular how the Natural History building wasn't lined up straight with the Faculty of Law and Literature but set back a little further. He decided that next time he saw Nonomiya, he would bring up this theory as if it were his own discovery. He was also impressed by the library, which jutted out about half a block forward from the right end of the Faculty of Law and Literature. He wasn't entirely sure, but he figured it must be built in the same style. And against that red brick wall, 5 or 6 tall sago palms had been planted, which he thought was just wonderful. Far off to the left, the engineering building looked like it had been modeled after a medieval European castle. It was perfectly square. Even the windows were square. Only the 4 corners and the entrance were rounded. That was probably meant to suggest turrets. And true to its castle-like design, it had a solid, sturdy feel to it. Nothing like the Faculty of Law and Literature, which looked like it might topple over any moment. It reminded him of a short, stocky sumo wrestler. Sanshiro took in everything he could see, and factoring in all the buildings still out of his line of sight, he felt a sense of grandeur wash over him. This is exactly what a place of learning should be. It's only with surroundings like these that real scholarship can happen. Magnificent, Sanshiro thought, feeling as though he had already become a great scholar. But when he stepped into the classroom, the bell rang and the professor never showed up. But no students showed up either. The same thing happened the next period. Sanshiro got fed up and walked out of the classroom. Then, just to be sure, he walked around the pond a couple of times before heading back to his lodgings. About 10 days or so after that, lectures finally began. When Sanshiro walked into a classroom for the first time and sat waiting alongside the other students for the professor to arrive, he felt a kind of genuine, almost reverent awe. It must be something like the feeling a Shinto priest gets when he's dressed in his ceremonial robes, standing on the threshold of a ritual about to begin. Sanshiro reflected on his own state of mind and thought that must be exactly what it felt like. He must truly have been struck by the dignity of scholarship. On top of that, when the professor still hadn't shown up 15 minutes after the bell rang, Sanshiro's sense of reverent anticipation only grew stronger. Then a distinguished-looking elderly Western gentleman opened the door, walked in, and began his lecture in fluent English. It was right around then that Sanshiro learned that the word answer came from the Anglo-Saxon, and that the word answer came from the Anglo-Saxon and swaru. After that, he wrote down the name of the village where Scott went to primary school. He carefully noted everything in his notebook. Next, he attended a lecture on literary theory. This professor walked into the classroom and paused for a moment, glancing at the blackboard. He glanced at the words Geschehen and Nachbild written on the blackboard. "Oh, German, is it?" he said with a laugh and quickly wiped it all off. Sanshiro felt that this had cost him a little of his respect for the German language. The professor then went through roughly 20 definitions of literature that writers and scholars had proposed over the centuries. Sanshiro carefully wrote every one of them down in his notebook. In the afternoon, he went to a large lecture hall. There were about 70 or 80 students in the room, so the professor spoke in the style of a public address. The lecture opened with the line, "A single cannon shot shattered the dreams of Uraga," and Sanshiro was listening with great interest when, by the end, so many German philosophers' names started coming up that it became incredibly hard to follow. He glanced down at the desk and found the word failure beautifully carved right into the wood. Whoever carved it had clearly had plenty of time on their hands. The clean, precise cuts into the hard oak were no amateur's work. It was deeply, masterfully done. The man next to him seemed impressively diligent, steadily taking notes the whole time. Sanshiro leaned over to look, and it turned out he wasn't taking notes at all. He'd been sketching a caricature of the professor from all the way across the room. The moment Sanshiro leaned over, the man beside him turned his notebook toward him to show it off. The drawing itself was good, but written next to it were the words, "The cuckoo, child of the clouds where once the skylarks dwell." And Sanshiro couldn't make heads or tails of what that was supposed to mean. When the lecture was finally over, Sanshiro felt vaguely worn out. He leaned on the second-floor windowsill, chin resting in his hand, gazing down at the garden inside the main gate. There were just large pine and cherry trees planted along a wide gravel path. Nothing too fussed over. It was a pleasant sight to look at. According to Nonomiya, the place hadn't always looked this nice. Nonomiya's professor, or whoever it was, used to ride a horse around these grounds when he was a student. But the horse wouldn't listen to him. The horse was being difficult on purpose, ducking under low branches so that his hat kept getting caught in the pine trees. His sandal clogs kept getting caught in the stirrups. The professor was in quite a fix when a whole crowd of barbers from the Kitadoko barbershop right in front of the main gate came pouring out. They had all gotten a good laugh out of it, apparently. Back in those days, a group of volunteers had pooled their money to build a stable on campus, where they kept 3 horses and a riding instructor. But it turned out the riding instructor was a terrible drunk, and he ended up selling the finest of the 3 horses, a white one, and drinking away the money. Apparently, it had been an old horse from the days of Napoleon III. Well, it probably wasn't really from Napoleon III's time. He was lost in thought about what a carefree era that must have been, when the guy who had been sketching cartoons earlier came over and said, "University lectures are pretty boring, aren't they?" Sanshiro gave a vague, non-committal reply. The truth was, he had absolutely no idea whether the lectures were interesting or not. But from that moment on, the two of them started talking to each other. That day he felt vaguely out of sorts and in no mood for anything, so he skipped his usual walk around the pond and headed home. After dinner, he went back over his lecture notes, reading through them again, but they left him feeling neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. He wrote his mother a letter in the modern colloquial style. School had begun. I'll be going every day from now on. The campus is wonderfully large and open, and the buildings are beautiful. There's a pond right in the middle, and I love taking walks around it. He'd finally gotten used to riding the streetcar lately. He wanted to buy her something, but since he had no idea what, he didn't buy her anything. If you want something, just let me know. Rice prices are bound to go up soon, so you're better off holding on to it rather than selling now. You'd be better off not being too friendly with Omitsu from Miwata. Coming to Tokyo, you realize there are people everywhere. Plenty of men, but plenty of women, too. That was the jumbled mess of things he wrote. After finishing the letter, he tried reading 6 or 7 pages of an English book before giving up. He started thinking that reading even a whole book like this wouldn't do him any good. He laid out his bedding and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He was thinking he should go to the hospital soon if his insomnia kept up. And somewhere in the middle of that thought, he fell asleep. The next day, he went to class at the usual time and sat through his lectures. During the lecture, he overheard people talking about which graduates from this year had landed jobs and for how much. Someone was going around saying that so-and-so were still left without positions, and that they were competing for a spot at some government school. Sanshiro felt a vague, dull sense of pressure, as if the future were pressing in on him from somewhere far away, but he forgot about it almost immediately. If anything, he found the talk about what Shonosuke had done far more interesting. So he grabbed a classmate from Kumamoto in the hallway and asked who Shonosuke was. Turns out it was a young woman who performed Gidayu chanting at a variety theater. He even described what the Yose billboard looked like and where exactly in Hongo it was, then invited Sanshiro to come along that Saturday. Turns out the guy had only gone to the Rakugo theater himself for the first time just the night before. But somehow, Sanshiro found himself wanting to go and see Shonosuke perform. Just as Sanshiro was thinking of heading back to his lodgings for lunch, the fellow who had drawn the caricature showed up, calling out to him. He dragged Sanshiro along to a place on Hongo called Yodomikin and treated him to rice curry. The place called Yodomikin also sold fruit out front. It was a newly built shop. The guy who'd drawn the cartoon pointed to the front of the building and told Sanshiro it was in the Art Nouveau style. Sanshiro had never realized that architecture could come in Art Nouveau too. On the way back, he was also shown Aokido. Apparently that was another popular spot for university students. They went in through the Akamon gate and strolled together around the pond. Then the caricature guy said, "The late Koizumi Yakumo," he said, hated going into the faculty lounge, so after every lecture he would just walk round and round this pond. He said it all as if he had actually learned it from Professor Koizumi himself. Sanshiro asked why he never went into the faculty lounge, and the man said, "Well, isn't it obvious? I mean, you can tell just from listening to their lectures. There isn't a single one worth talking to," he said without batting an eye. And Sanshiro was genuinely taken aback by how harsh that was. This fellow's name was Sasaki Yojiro. He'd already graduated from a vocational school and had just enrolled in the elective program that same year. He told Sanshiro he lived at number 5, Higashi Katamachi, at a place called Hirota's, and invited him to come visit. Sanshiro asked if it was lodgings, and Yojiro said no, it was the home of a higher school professor. After that, for a while, Sanshiro went to school every day and dutifully attended his lectures. He also sat in on classes outside his required courses from time to time. And still, it wasn't enough. So eventually, he even started dropping in on courses that had nothing to do with his major. But most of the time, he'd stop going after 2 or 3 sessions. Not a single one lasted even a month. Still, it averaged out to roughly 40 hours a week. Even for someone as hard-working as Sanshiro, 40 hours was simply too much. Sanshiro felt a constant nagging sense of pressure, and yet it still wasn't enough. He had stopped enjoying himself. One day, Sanshiro ran into Sasaki Yojiro and told him about it. When Yojiro heard 40 hours, his eyes went wide and he just said, "You idiot, you absolute idiot." But then he hit Sanshiro over the head with a wisecrack. Think about it. Would you feel satisfied if you ate the lousy food at your lodgings 10 times a day? Sanshiro immediately backed down and asked, "So what should I do?" Ride the streetcar, Yojiro said. Sanshiro figured there must be some deeper meaning behind that, so he sat with it for a moment. But nothing particular came to mind. Is this an actual streetcar, you mean? Sanshiro asked, wanting to make sure. At that, Yojiro burst out laughing. Ride the streetcar around Tokyo 15 or 16 times and you'll naturally start to feel satisfied, Yojiro said. Why? Why? Well, look, you can't keep a living mind locked up in dead lectures. It just doesn't work. You've got to get outside and let some fresh air in. Beyond that, there are plenty of other ways to feel satisfied. But the streetcar is the best place to start, and it's by far the easiest. That same evening, Yojiro dragged Sanshiro along, hopped on a streetcar at Yonchome, rode out to Shimbashi, then turned back and came all the way to Nihonbashi. They got off there. Well, what do you think? Yojiro asked. Then he led Sanshiro off the main boulevard and down a narrow side street, into a restaurant with a sign reading Hiranoya, where they went upstairs, had dinner, and drank some sake. All the maids there spoke in Kyoto dialect, which had a wonderfully soft, lingering quality to it. When they stepped back outside, Yojiro's face was flushed red, and he asked again, "So what do you think?" Next, Yojiro said he'd take Sanshiro to a real yose, and led him down another narrow alley into a place called Kiharadana. There they listened to a rakugo storyteller named Kosan. When they came back out onto the street after 10 o'clock, Yojiro asked again, "Well, what do you think?" Sanshiro didn't say he was satisfied, but he couldn't honestly say he was unsatisfied either. At that, Yojiro launched into a long and enthusiastic lecture about Kosan. Kosan is a genuine genius. Artists like him come along once in a lifetime. The sad thing is, people take him for granted just because they can catch his act any time they feel like it. The truth is, we who are alive at the same time as him are incredibly lucky. If you'd been born even a little before now, you'd never get to hear Kosan. Come a little too late and it's the same story. Enyu is talented too, but his style is something else entirely. The thing is, when Enyu plays a court jester, it's funny because it's Enyu becoming the jester. But when Kosan plays a court jester, what makes Kosan's performance interesting is that the character exists apart from Kosan himself. Take away Enyu from the characters he performs, and those characters simply vanish into thin air. But take away Kosan from the characters he plays, and those characters just keep right on living, jumping off the stage with a life of their own. That's what makes him truly great. Yojiro said all this, then asked, "So what do you think?" To be honest, Sanshiro didn't really get what made Kosan so special. On top of that, Sanshiro had never once heard Enyu perform, so he had no real way to judge whether Yojiro's argument held water or not. But Sanshiro was genuinely impressed by how the comparison managed to be almost literary in its precision. When they parted in front of the higher school, "Thank you, that was really satisfying," Sanshiro said. Yojiro replied, "After this, the library is the only place that'll really satisfy you," he said, and turned off toward Katamachi. That single remark was how Sanshiro first learned you could actually go inside the library. Starting the very next day, he cut his 40 hours of lectures down to nearly half, and so he went into the library. It was a wide, long building with high ceilings and rows of windows running down both sides. Of the stacks, only the entrance was visible. Peering in from the entrance, the stacks seemed to go on forever, packed with books as far as the eye could see. As he stood there looking around, someone came out of the stacks carrying 2 or 3 thick volumes, turned left at the exit, and headed off toward the staff reading room. Some people had pulled the books they needed right off the shelves and were standing there with them spread wide open across their chests, looking things up on the spot. Sanshiro felt a pang of envy. He wanted to go all the way to the back, climb to the 2nd floor, then the 3rd, high above Hongo, away from anything living, breathing in the smell of paper. He wanted to read. But as for what to read, he had no clear idea at all. He wouldn't know until he started reading, but he had a feeling there was something in there, somewhere deep in the stacks, just waiting for him. Sanshiro was a first-year student, so he had no right to enter the stacks. With no other option, Sanshiro crouched down and began going through the large card catalog box, card by card. But no matter how many he flipped through, new titles just kept coming. Eventually, his shoulders started to ache. He straightened up to take a break and looked around the hall. It was quiet, as you'd expect from a library. And yet there were so many people inside. And across the room, the heads of the people at the far end were dark shapes, their faces too distant to make out. Through the tall windows here and there, trees were visible. A strip of sky, too. From far away came the sounds of the city. Sanshiro stood there and thought to himself that the life of a scholar was quiet and deep, and so he simply headed home for the day. The next day, he put his daydreaming aside and went straight to borrowing a book as soon as he walked in. But he'd picked the wrong one, so he returned it right away. The next book he borrowed was too difficult to read, so he returned that one too. This was just how Sanshiro operated, and he made sure to check out 8 or 9 books every single day. Though every now and then he did actually read a little of one. What really caught Sanshiro off guard was the discovery that no matter which book he borrowed, someone had always read through it at least once before him. The pencil marks scattered throughout the pages made that perfectly clear. At one point, just to test the theory, Sanshiro checked out a novel by an author named Afra Ben. Before he opened it, he'd thought surely not, but there it was, neat pencil marks throughout. That was the moment Sanshiro decided this was simply too much to keep up with. Just then a band happened to pass by outside the window, and that was enough to put him in the mood for a walk. He stepped out onto the street and ended up wandering into Aokido. When he stepped inside, there were 2 groups of customers, all students, but off in the far corner sat a lone man by himself, drinking tea. Sanshiro happened to glance over at the man's profile, and thought he looked very much like the person who had eaten all those white peaches on the train coming up to Tokyo. The man hadn't noticed him. He'd take a sip of tea, then a drag of his cigarette, completely unhurried. Today, he'd traded his white cotton yukata for a suit, but it wasn't anything impressive. He was only a slight step up from Nonomiya, the light-pressure researcher, in that at least he had a clean white shirt on. After watching him for a while, Sanshiro was now certain, beyond any doubt, that this was the man with the peaches. Ever since sitting through those university lectures, the things this man had said on the train had started to feel suddenly meaningful. Sanshiro thought about going over and saying hello, but the man just kept staring straight ahead, sipping his tea and smoking and sipping his tea. There was no opening to approach him. Sanshiro sat there staring at the man's profile for a long moment, then suddenly drained his glass of wine and bolted outside. After that, he headed back to the library. That day, buoyed by the wine and some kind of shift in his mood, Sanshiro found himself studying with a focus and enjoyment he rarely experienced, and he felt genuinely pleased about it. After about 2 hours lost in reading, Sanshiro finally came to his senses and slowly began getting ready to leave. Among the books he had borrowed together, he casually pulled open the last book he hadn't looked at yet, and there, scrawled all over the blank pages at the front in pencil, was a whole mess of writing. When Hegel lectured on philosophy at the University of Berlin, he had not the slightest intention of selling philosophy. His lectures were not lectures that spoke the truth, but lectures of a man who had lived the truth. Not lectures of the tongue, but lectures of the heart. When truth and the person become one, perfectly fused and unified, then what is spoken and said is no longer a lecture for the sake of lecturing, but a lecture in service of the way. A philosophy lecture only becomes worth hearing when it reaches that point. Those who merely roll truth around on the tip of their tongue are doing nothing more than leaving empty scribblings in dead ink on dead paper. What meaning could there possibly be in that? And now I read this book in resentment and in tears for the sake of examinations, which is to say, for the sake of bread. Remember this, with my throbbing head in my hands, I curse the examination system to the end of eternity. There was no signature, of course. Sanshiro couldn't help but smile. Still, he felt somehow enlightened. Sanshiro thought to himself that it wasn't just philosophy, literature was probably the same way, and as he turned the page, there was more. Hegel's. Whoever wrote this was clearly quite fond of Hegel. The students who gathered in Berlin from all corners of the world to hear Hegel's lectures did not come with the selfish ambition of using those lectures as a means to earn their daily bread. They came simply because they heard there was a great philosopher named Hegel, who stood at the podium and conveyed the highest universal truth, and their hearts burned with a longing to rise higher and seek the way. They gathered at the foot of that podium. It was nothing less than the pure impulse of the heart, yearning to have its restless doubts resolved. That is why they listened to Hegel and were able to shape their own futures. They were able to transform their own destinies. If you think it's the same as you Japanese university students, who sit through lectures with a blank face and graduate with that same blank face, then you are the most self-deluded people on earth. You are nothing but typewriters, greedy typewriters at that. Everything you do, everything you think, everything you say, none of it connects to the vital pulse of society. Blank-faced until the day you die. Blank-faced until death, he repeats twice, hammering the phrase home. Sanshiro sat in silence, lost in thought. Just then, someone gave him a light tap on the shoulder from behind. It was Yojiro, as usual. Seeing Yojiro in the library was a rare thing. He was the kind of guy who insisted that lectures were a waste of time, but the library was everything. Though in practice, he rarely set foot in one. "Hey, Nonomiya Sosachi was looking for you," he said. Sanshiro hadn't expected Yojiro to know Nonomiya. So just to be sure, he asked whether he meant the Nonomiya from the science building. Yojiro said yes. Oh. Sanshiro set his book down right away and headed out to the newspaper reading area near the entrance. But Nonomiya was nowhere to be found. He went all the way to the front door, but still no sign of him. Sanshiro went down the stone steps and craned his neck, looking around, but there was no sign of him anywhere. There was nothing to do but turn back. When Sanshiro got back to his seat, Yojiro was pointing at the Hegel essay with a grin, muttering quietly, "This one's really something. Has to be from one of the old graduates." The old guys were rough around the edges, but there's something interesting about them. This essay is a perfect example. He was grinning to himself, clearly quite taken with it. Sanshiro. "Nonomiya's not around," Sanshiro said. "He was at the entrance a little while ago, though." Did he seem like he needed something? Maybe so. The two of them left the library together. On the way, Yojiro told him Nonomiya often comes around because he used to be a student of Professor Hirota, the man Yojiro was boarding with. He had a real passion for learning and had done quite a bit of research. Anyone in his field, even Western scholars, knew Nonomiya's name. That made Sanshiro think back to the man he'd seen struggling with a horse inside the main gate, the one who turned out to be Nonomiya's professor, and he began to wonder if that might have been Prof. Hirota. When Sanshiro mentioned it to Yojiro, Yojiro laughed and said it could very well be his professor, that it was exactly the kind of thing he would do.